And looks like we're live. Welcome to the Standout Business Show, where it's all about making a bigger difference by doing business differently. I'm Brad Powell, your Standout Business Coach. And on our show today, we're talking about how you could be using gamification to create an addictive and epic webinar. So here's the thing. The webinar world is getting pretty stale out there. Most webinars, as you probably know, they seem to always follow this same formula. They hook you with this big promise, and then the presenter spends most of the time of the next 90 minutes talking about their case studies, their own background. They give you a couple of tips, and it all leads to, wait for it, a sales pitch. And come and buy my thing. And so you're left thinking, well, oh man, that's 90 minutes totally wasted. And they don't have to be like this. Like, I don't want to diss webinars as a medium, because I actually think that done properly and done with really good back and forth engagement with the participants, this experiential learning opportunity is huge. And it's a lot of good can come from this. And a lot of good can come if you're doing webinars or any kind of masterclass as part of your marketing. So what if your own events could be really different? What if they could be super engaging and interactive, so much that your attendees are leaving feeling like they really got something, they're inspired, they're energized, and that is kind of what we're all looking for here. So to help answer how to do this, I've invited gamification and game learning expert Caitlin Johnson onto the show to talk about how you can not only make your next webinar more engaging, but turn it into an epic adventure. Imagine that. So Caitlin is founder and lead consultant of Bold Bird Consulting. Her background is in gamification, change management, and leadership development. And for the past 15 years, she's impacted over 72,000 global leaders. So if you're ready to create an addictive, epic webinar, 2025, stay tuned. And with that, let's start the show. Caitlin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And gosh, I love the tee up of how can we make webinars just more adventurous, more inspiring and fun. And I'm here for it. I'm here to share some of the ideas that you can incorporate really simply into your webinars.
Yeah, well, I am a huge believer in all forms of experiential education and experiential learning. I'm a big believer that people actually do learn best by doing.
Absolutely. I agree.
And possibly they learn worst by sitting in front of PowerPoint.
Nothing's worse. Like, especially if you think too about like self-paced trainings, and there's a lot of them. The drop-off rate of these are upwards to 96%. They just don't hook us and keep us engaged as we're moving along.
Yeah. Yeah. And so given that, like, most of the professional community seem addicted to this very static form of education transfer. Like, come in here, sit down, and we're going to present. And it feels like history class in 6th grade or something. You're just like, oh no, how do I get out of here?
Right. Yeah,
so,
you're absolutely right.
You know, so this idea, like the idea of not only making it more engaging, but making it more fun and almost like we're on a journey. We have a destination, and there are hills and valleys and challenges to meet and overcome along the way, so that as we go along, just like if you were actually playing a real game, there are rewards and there are things to, make happen, so that while you're doing it, not only are you learning something and getting an experience, but you're actually feeling good, and maybe even on an internal way, becoming a better, more capable person, which is, all part of the puzzle. So talk in a big picture way, how just the whole concept of game learning and gamification can apply to education and learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right. I think we've been doing learning and transferring of knowledge in the same way as we remember growing up in sixth grade. And so therefore that's what we then do and we replicate. But there's a better way, a fun way of being able to engage with our audiences. So I've got a lot of different strategies that you can apply into your own learning. But I want you to start with the psychology behind how we prefer to play games. So first, I want to tell you there are 4 different ways that we prefer to play games, and specifically video games. Everything that I reference comes from a video game standpoint and background. And there's a gentleman by the name of Richard Bartle, who is a British researcher and professor, who in 1996, and really in the world of video games, 1996 is quite a while ago. But in 1996, he found that there are 4 main ways that we prefer to play games. When you keep these different player types in mind, then you can start to think about what game mechanics or tactics could you apply to support learning. The first one is what he calls a killer. It's not my favorite word. I prefer to call it a dominator. These players are the ones that want to highly compete. They want to be the first on the leaderboards. If you were to do a timed activity where it's, hey, in less than 30 seconds or in 1 minute, do X, Y, and Z to apply the learnings that we tried, the dominators are going to be the ones that get it done first. The second game player type is an achiever. They like to collect all the experiences along the way, the different badges. They would love if there's a completion badge at the end of your training or your webinar so that they could then post on social to say, hey, I just spent this time learning this skill and here's my badge to prove it. The third player type is an explorer. These are the ones, individuals who are there to take in all the information that you're sharing, but they also want to push the buttons. They want to go down rabbit holes. They want to see what else is possible. They might ask you the tough questions or even just have questions, but as a facilitator or a webinar host, you haven't built in time for your audience to ask questions. So that's always key here. The fourth player type is a socializer or a connector. They prefer to play games with other people. So if you think about leveraging your chat feature in whatever platform, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever the case may be, they're looking to connect with other people. So first, there are those 4 psychological dynamics of how we prefer to play games. Now, we could make this a science project, Brad, and like totally geek out onto, well, what are all the right tactics to inspire all 4 of those player types? And that is what I hope people aspire to be. But let's just talk really simply of some ideas that you can engage your audience that maybe you're not fully utilizing. And I would also say, don't overcomplicate it. And here's what I mean by that. Zoom in particular offers a lot of engagement functionality, one of which I've been testing out a little bit more and then have opted not to use, is the annotate function. So annotate allows for all of your participants to be able to pick a stamp and then stamp on the screen. And so you can create like a 4x4 grid and say, all right, hey, we just learned about XYZ concept. What would you do as a result of it? Pick which box, right? And then they can click on the screen. It's a really cool functionality, but here's why I don't use it. Not everybody is savvy when it comes to technology. So even if you have a here's how to use annotate slide, which I've given instructions on how to find it, how to use it, I usually find 2 to 3 people who can't for the life of them find this button, and then they feel left out. So now I just disengaged that person. So while it's a cool functionality, I use it sparingly, or if I know my audience is savvy with the technology. Some of my favorite go-to strategies is to have a welcome slide that just says, share where you're calling in from, type in your LinkedIn profile code so that we can connect with each other. Because while you are the subject matter expert in these webinars, it can unfortunately be the incident of where we see ourselves as the sage on the stage and we become a talking head. But we need to engage the audience. I think about some of the most engaging webinars I've been on, and they've provided opportunity for me to think and to connect with who else has joined. If I can connect with 2 or 3 people outside of this webinar after the fact, I feel like huge value has been had. So create opportunities for people to network and connect with each other at the very beginning. So I'll pause there. I'm saying so many great things. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm just going to go back to these 4 basic things: the killer / dominator, and the achiever, the explorer, and the social connector.
Yes.
And what's interesting for when I hear each one of those, I go, well, I think this is true for lots of people. Well, there's a part of me in all of those. Like,
Oh, yes.
I know, like, I used to be, when I was growing up, a huge, I never got into video games, but I was big into board games. Like, used to play Risk, used to play all these. I mean, I can list them all off. There's a ton, I had a whole like closet stacked with all of these
board games.
and I would play them for hours with my friends, and I was very competitive. You know, sort of the high.
So there's no friends in card games with you, right, Brad?
That's right. And I, like, people would look at me and go, "Man, you are so cutthroat." And I go, "Yeah, but we're just playing a game here. You know, this is the idea." And but in addition to that, you know, like, certainly for in the context of a webinar, when I do somebody else's event, I am also there to connect with the other people who are there. It's a big reason to go. And just like what you just said, if you come away and you have made a couple of connections, even like 2 of new people who you've met who seem interesting, that alone has made going to that event quite valuable. And yes, of course, you know, the more exploration there is, and, you know, sort of, if there's something in there that makes me think critically about something, or get an insight that I didn't get before, or allows me to explore something about the work that I do, you know, and how I do it, you know, and that all of that is really good learning. So all of those together make for a great combination.
100%. Yes. And then when we think about exploring, so simple ways to be able to engage your audience, again, you're wanting to transfer knowledge so that they can also apply it. There's been a lot of trainings where I've gone through, or webinars where I've gone through, I'm like, well, that's a really great idea, but I didn't have the time to really deep dive and think about how to apply it into my world. So then it's like, oh, that's a nice idea. What happens after the webinar's over, Brad? We've got like 17 other things and 47 emails, and there goes the information, right? So intentionally creating moments to say, now what would you do? Right? Here's the problem that we're looking to address. Here are some solutions that me as a subject matter expert are applying. Now, how would you apply that into your space? And then here's one of my favorite chat prompts. What I'd like for you to do is go to the chat. Don't press enter yet. Type in your response. And when I say go, then press enter. So this gives everybody a chance to pause, because nothing's more uncomfortable, especially as a host or an attendee, when the facilitator says, type in the chat what your thoughts are. And then it's crickets. It's crickets, right? But again, like, virtually, you haven't given somebody enough time to think about what their response could even be. So you give them the time. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. You could even pull in a digital timer onto your screen. There's some great apps for that. Or you could just say, hey, I've got my phone. I'm going to, in 30 seconds, I'll check back with you. Type in your response. And when I say go, press enter. And it's this chat blast. And so then all of a sudden, everyone's curious. What it also does is it doesn't influence other attendees to see, like, well, what did they say? And, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, right? So you're getting unique answers. And then you create time to say, okay, let's all look at the chat and see what we've all said. And then you pick a couple attendees to expand on, I see what you wrote there. Can you tell me more about what your thoughts are? This, again, creates connection with the audience to be able to understand, well, how are other people thinking about this? And what other ideas can I learn from the attendees? I find that with 15 years of facilitation of in-person and virtual, people almost learn more from each other than they do from you as the subject matter expert.
Right. Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
through the application, right?
Yeah. I think I find that when you're working with a group, that's actually the beauty of group education, is because they help each other. There's a really great book out there called The Art of Possibility
Hmm.
by Ben and Rosamund Zander. Ben Zander was the, I don't know if he still is because he's getting on in age, but he was the conductor for the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And
Mhm.
his wife is a therapist, and they wrote this terrific book together. But he tells a story in there about going to Cuba. The chapter is called Learning from Every Chair.
Interesting.
And
Oh,
yeah,
oh, I get it. The orchestra pun.
right. It's
Took me a
an
minute.
orchestra reference. And so anyway, he had a trip with this youth orchestra that went to Cuba to play alongside a Cuban youth
Mhm.
orchestra. And somehow, before the arrival of this event that they were going to do together, the
Mhm.
music that the Cubans were going to play that was being brought never made it to them.
Hmm.
And so they hadn't learned the piece that they were going to play together.
Okay, that could be
And so,
problematic.
yeah, right. It was like, oh, now what do we do? And so, anyway, he had the two orchestras get together, and each instrument taught their corresponding instrument how to do the piece.
Oh,
Is
love
how they did
that.
it. So the orchestra
Mhm.
just completely intermingled and did that all together. And that was, to me, I took that like back in the day when I was an outdoor educator, and my role was I was actually the director of the program, but our our medium was we'd go out in these open rowing sailing boats and
Hmm.
10 people on board. Each person had an oar. We did a lot of
Yeah.
rowing and singing and chanting together.
Okay. That
And
that creates some collaboration.
yeah, but the thing is, and from a leadership point of view, typically on a boat, there's always like one captain,
Mhm.
and the captain is in the back of the boat, and the captain doesn't do anything,
Hmm.
and the captain tells everybody what to do, and they just, whatever the captain says, they do it. And I kept introducing this other way of leading on the water.
Hmm.
I took this thing of lead from any chair. It was like lead from any bench.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And I
I
would
like
go
it.
up into like the bow of the boat and row
Uh-huh.
and let the group collectively do things. Which
Mm.
is really
Mhm.
contrary to how boats are usually operated, especially hard to run ones like these were. And it was fascinating experimentation to see what the group would do as a dynamic. And we even did things as far as um, we wouldn't allow anybody to talk. It was just like, well, we're going to sail, and of
Mhm.
course you have to tack through the wind and do these various maneuvers, and we're going to go from here to there, and it's going to take us probably an hour and a half to get there, maybe if we're lucky.
Okay.
And but nobody can talk the whole way.
Wow.
And
So
then
what did that do?
the next
What
step
did it
beyond
do?
that is we would
Yeah.
actually blindfold half the crew.
Oh,
And
wow.
and so half the crew could say things, the other half of the crew had to do things.
Okay.
And so you'd have a partner. And this again, like learn from every chair. It's like, here you have a partner, and they're your hands. They're the means
Mm.
by which things are going to happen. And you need to help them verbally, but you can't actually
Mm.
physically help them.
Mm.
And they
That's
can't see,
hard.
but oh yeah, it was it was
Yeah.
really fascinating, fun, interesting, unusual, and all kinds of good stuff happened.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of like a little mini icebreaker that I've done, which you could do this virtually as well as in person, where you have two people get together. One person has a shape, like some combination of shapes, and you sit back to back, or virtually. You could be in the same room, just don't show the other person the picture. But you have to verbally explain the shapes and how they connect, and
Yeah,
have the other person draw it.
yeah,
And it just most always never matches. It's very hard to verbally explain something clearly and simply to another person to be able to write it. But it's a really great art activity to be able to talk about effective communication, collaboration, listening. Like it's a really great activity.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, bring us back on track here.
Yes. Well, I'm
So,
thinking about collaboration actually, Brad.
okay.
So I like to talk about collaboration partners versus accountability partners. And
Mm,
it's a bit of semantics, right? Accountability seems so heavy. And there are so many traits. Like if you are a facilitator by trade, you usually do have content that you're training, and then it's the connect with your accountability partner from the session so you can
right,
continue learnings. I
right.
like to think of it as a collaboration partner because you're both learning together, and how can you support each other versus hold yourself accountable in the way that we feel that word. So collaborating together post workshop. And that's where I see too, if you're getting unique users into your workshop and you're having them connect on LinkedIn, then it might be, hey, connect with somebody intentionally and collaborate with them on how they're going to incorporate the learnings into their day-to-day and be each other's support. And then that's where learning continues outside of the workshop and outside of the session as people continue to apply that information. Breakout rooms are a great opportunity as well. A clear tip if you're going to do breakout rooms is to have the instructions on the slide beforehand, explain it. And then I love to ask the question instead of, does anybody have any questions? Because again, like semantics, nobody wants to ask a question. But I'll ask, is there anything I can clarify before I open the breakout rooms? So this gives people a chance to just say like, oh, I'm actually a little confused. And I get more questions, quite frankly, as a result of asking, is there anything I can clarify before I open breakout rooms versus are there any questions?
Yeah, right. Good.
So,
Good question. Well, that
yeah,
gives me
right.
it reminds me of, this idea of framing. Like, before you're in you're moving to a new piece, a new activity of some kind, the importance of framing that activity before you get into the activity, like, make a
Mhm,
clear and what
mhm.
I'm talking about is, like, just what you said, like, are the things that we need to clarify? It's basically creating a frame, like, here's the parameters, here's what's gonna happen, and so on, so that people are really you're just checking in so that everybody knows that they're in the same game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the overall trend that I see when you're trying to incorporate gamified methods of engaging, the idea is that you engage with your audience and that you keep engaging and you re-engage with your audience because we get so distracted. The way we live today, our attention is being pulled in so many directions, whether it's a ping on our watch, which I don't like using Apple Watches because I turn all of that functionality off. It's too distracting. But it could be a watch ping, it could be a phone ping, it could be an email ping, whatever the case may be. Your intent is to engage and re-engage with the audience in fun and engaging ways. So I do want to go back to those 4 game player types and give you some ideas on how to specifically think about each of those 4 players. So when we think about the dominator, that killer personality, super competitive, if you were to create again those short, quick little quests of, all right, you've got 30 seconds. Let's see how many things you can type in the chat about XYZ topic. Ready, go. And then let the 30 seconds pass and see who pops into the chat. For an achiever, calling them out by name, they really appreciate the recognition. Like they go after badges and certifications because they want the accolades. So you could find out like who's participating in the chat and then just call them by name to be able to give that recognition, or have a very simple certification or badge of honor, so to speak, of after attending the session. The explorers, so little side quests inside of, they could be little mini challenges where you could offer, like, after this session, here's something where you could dive a little bit deeper. Or if you're curious and want more information, here's a white paper on that, and you can put it in the chat for future reading after the session. Bonus material. So after the session's over, And then you might want to send a thank you email for attending, and hey, I've got a bonus, sign up for X, Y, and Z, or another additional, opportunity to learn more information. And then for those connectors, the socializers, this is where those collaboration partners come in play, anything having to do with the chat to be able to learn from each other, and breakout rooms are really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the idea that it sort of goes with that thing you were talking about in terms of, I'm going to say some things and I want you to respond, but don't do it right away.
Yes. Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Mhm.
And then the same thing is like, okay, but this is almost the opposite of that. Okay, now I'm going to say something and then I'm going to give you 30 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever, and type as many of these things as you can.
Yeah.
Go. And then
Right.
it's a race. It's like,
Think about the mentality too. Like there's certain, like I would imagine if you preferred to play Risk growing up, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm right there. Like 30 seconds, I'm going to put in my answer real quick, right? Whereas some folks who might be more, the socializing, connecting, like they may be like, you know what, I want to see what other people say first, and then
Yep.
I'll go ahead and apply my thoughts. So there's two different ways to engage with two different psychologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And critical to be accommodating to
Mhm.
all of them.
Mhm.
For sure. Yeah. This is really cool. All right. Well, it's interesting. We're now like the time just went.
Yes, I know. It's a
Zoomed
fun
right by.
topic. Yeah.
It's a great topic. We could talk for a really long time, and there's so much more. If there is another piece of wisdom that you could share as people
Mm.
are thinking, well, these are cool. Now I'm thinking I'm going to redesign my next presentation to include some of these. What would you like to say to those folks?
I think my biggest takeaway is to think of yourself as a guide to transfer information. Make the attendee the hero. So don't be the sage on the stage and be the talking head. Create opportunities for your attendees to be able to process and think, which truly makes you work just a little bit harder as a presenter, because you need to clarify and simplify your message in order to make time for those opportunities for your audience members to connect and to think.
Yeah, the world of presentations could really gain from clarifying and simplifying.
Yes.
Make it shorter.
Yes. Yes.
Don't put up that slide with that's just covered with stuff. It's too much.
Yeah. And then please don't read it, right? Because I can read it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the worst. Just like, here's all this stuff. Let me just read it to you. It's like, why
Mhm.
bother? Why don't you just send it to me
Mhm.
in PDF?
That's exactly right. Mhm.
Well, Caitlin, this is terrific stuff. I'm inspired. I know that my own next presentation is going to be better as a result of this. So thank you
Wonderful.
so much for that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, right. And for those of you who are listening at the end, I just want to remind you that if you want to go and get the entire archive of the Stand Out Business Show, just go to standoutbusiness.show. You'll find it all there, all the audio and the video, and all the things that I put in there just for my listeners. We go live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And until the next time, so long.